AI is a part of this conversation, and the AI is being rolled out by some projections 5 to 10 years ahead of where the predictions were. It is an advanced technology for sure that has been dumped into the laps of a general population with no guidelines, no guardrails in our community, our New Thought community. There are very few people that really understand AI. Two parallel themes that are unfolding in our society today, globally. This isn't just in Australia or America or in the West. This is in the whole world. Number one, the best minds of our time are telling us that unless we change the trajectory of our thinking very quickly, that we are most probably, not possibly, but most probably the last generation of pure humans that the world will ever know within the next 4 to 5 years, 2030 to 2032. They say when we go to the grocery market or you go to the airport or you meet with friends, that we will be interacting with some hybrid of some mix of human biology and embedded technology into the humans. Excuse me. And that is one theme. Very rapidly, we're losing our humanness and the virtues that we cherish in our humanness. So that's one of the parallel themes. The second theme is the best science of the modern world is now telling us that we're not what we've been told. We're so much more than we've been led to believe. And they have begun looking at the human body from an IT perspective, information technology. In other words, they're looking at the cells and the DNA and the neurons and the cell membranes from a technological perspective. And what they found is that our biology is the equivalent of the transistors and the resistors and the capacitors and the photon generators and the photon emitters of our technology that we build in the world around us. And here's where it gets really interesting. Once we begin to understand that, in many cases, our own natural biology not only meets, but it exceeds the capacity of the very technology that we're being asked to replace ourselves with. In other words, that technology mimics what we already do in our bodies, except we do it better. So those are the two parallel themes of the book to bring people's attention to the fact that these things are happening. This isn't science fiction, 10 years down the road. This is happening right now in our lives. And there are people in the year since you and I have spoken, I've been at a number of conferences and certainly had interactions with other scientists that say to me, well, Gregg, isn't this the next step in our evolution? Isn't it natural for us to merge our bodies with the machines, to merge our bodies with the technology? And I don't even have to think about that to answer it. The answer is no. It is not a form of natural evolution. And as a matter of fact, what the science is showing is that when we replace our natural biology with synthetics, computer chips in the brain, artificial intelligence, chemicals in the blood, RFID chips under the skin, nano sensors, nanobots running through our bloodstream, that our natural abilities actually begin to atrophy. We lose parts of ourselves by trading our biology for technology. We are on the precipice of giving away our humanness to technology before we fully understand what it means to be human. There are individuals that have a propensity for greed and power and control, so they easily become pawns in this process that's unfolding because of their weakness. Their propensity for greed, we could say, is a weakness. That's one layer. There are other layers that go much deeper. I mean, you can go all the way down to the fundamental battle between good and evil. And the goal of evil is to deny our humanness. That is a fundamental, it's the stated goal of evil in our most ancient and cherished indigenous and spiritual traditions. The goal of evil is to deny us our human potential. Back in the 1950s, 1960s, early 1970s, we were taught that we're born into this world with a fixed number of brain cells, and we've all heard that. And that through choices in lifestyle, you lose those brain cells. If you drink too many beers in college, you do too many drugs at the concerts, you're going to lose the brain cells. Well, we now know that's not true. That's not an excuse to drink and do the drugs. But we now know that there's a part of our brain that is producing new brain cells, Guy, up until the last breath that we take. The catch is, if those new cells are not used in a meaningful way within about 7 to 10 days of when the brain produces them, they will begin to atrophy and die. It's interesting, Guy. A lot of people think AI is new. It's not. The first papers of AI were written back in 1930s. A man named Alan Turing, those computer scientists on your podcast know who Alan Turing was back in the 30s. Now, they didn't call it artificial intelligence. They called it machine intelligence. And there were papers written about machine intelligence. And then Alan Turing, again, in the 1950s, 40s and 50s, it was his machine intelligence that allowed the Allies to crack the code from the Germans during World War II, so that they would know when the Germans were going to attack certain cities and prevent that. They saved lives, and it was machine intelligence that did that. I feel especially close to this because I programmed AI during the Cold War in the 1980s. I was a civilian working for, I had a DOD clearance as a civilian, working for the Air Force during the Cold War. And we were using machine intelligence, certainly not what it is now. I mean, nowhere near what it is now. But I understand the principles. And so this is what I want to say. There is no interface in artificial intelligence that allows it to communicate with the field of our perceptions, of our, if you want to call them Akashic records, if you want to call it the field, whatever you want to call that. There is no interface that allows for that, at least right now, that allows for that communication. I think people that are open to the information that's out there can know it. They can become aware of it because it's not a secret. It's not hidden. It's a very different way of looking at the body. We're conditioned to look at the body as soft, sticky, wet, gooey, stuff inside the cells. Thinking of the body from an IT, information technology perspective, that's a way different way of thinking. And I'm acknowledging that. It's different for me. The first time I was working in the industry during the Cold War years, I was a senior computer systems designer in the U.S. During the Cold War years, not by choice. I had applied to the company that had the technology to send space probes to Mars as a geologist. My first degree is in geology. And I said, man, I want to explore the cosmos. This was back in the 70s and 80s. And that seemed like the best way to do it. I was a geologist, but I had a really unique background, and that I had also taught myself computer programming, which was not common in the 1970s. It was kind of a new. Any of our viewers who are old enough to remember, your computer code was written on cards. And those cards, you'd have a deck of those cards, and you'd actually load the deck into the machine. The machine would read the cards. Nothing like we've got now. So I had this unique combination of skills as a geologist, geophysicist, with math, physics, and I was learning computer science. And so I applied to the company. At that time, it was called Martin Marietta Aerospace, because I wanted to explore the cosmos. They hired me. And then they said, well, we're in the middle of the Cold War. We need your expertise side your expertise on the defense side of this company, not the space exploration side. And then when the Cold War is over, you can go explore space. So that was how I ended up in, where I did. And, Guy, the Cold War was a very civilized kind of war because the governments were at war, but the scientific community was deeply cooperating. A lot of communication between the scientists. And I'm saying this because it was during that time, right around 1983, 1984, that a Soviet paper was published showing human biology, showing the human cell as an electrical circuit, a schematic of an electrical circuit that had an input and an output, and the little components inside the cell were identified as resistors and transistors and capacitors all inside the cell. And American scientists said, "What are you guys doing? That's crazy." So the former Soviet Union, the Russian scientists were way ahead of American scientists, when it came to thinking of the body as, as technology. And that opened my eyes. I said, if that's possible, that means that we are regulating these cells. That means we're regulating this technology. And then I began to link that with our most ancient and cherished spiritual principles that tell us how to regulate through what we now call epigenetic triggers. So there's 7 key epigenetic triggers: thought, feeling, emotion, belief, breath, focus, nutrition, and movement. I guess that's 8. And that's the core of our indigenous and spiritual principles. Those epigenetic triggers are what regulates the technology inside of our bodies. And for me, it was the Russian papers that really helped me to seeing a human cell as an electrical circuit. And now we know every human cell generates 0.07 volts of electrical potential. So that's not much, but you multiply that times 50 trillion cells, and you're talking about 3.5 trillion volts of electrical potential in the human body. Potential. So what would it mean if we could harness that and apply it to our immune system or to our intuition? And that's what we stand to lose if we give our bodies away to the technology. Because then once you are dependent on a technology, you can be forced to comply with policies in order to have access to what you've become dependent upon. In other words, if you don't do these things, you're not going to have access to this tech. And now that's all you know. It's kind of like in the 70s, all of a sudden, this little company called Texas Instruments came out with this gadget called a calculator, a little handheld calculator. And we'd never seen one before. And all of a sudden, everybody became very dependent on those. And now you ask somebody, to do the math without a calculator, find the square root of, square root of 10. And unless you've got a calculator, how do you do that? So we become dependent upon that technology. So if someone came along and said, okay, now the only way that you can have access to that handheld calculator is if you do blah, blah, blah. And that's where the compliance comes in. This is exactly what's happening with the AI right now, work in one form or another. And I don't say the same thing every year because it gets old. I move on because we've already covered those things. And that body of work is out there. So we're living a convergence of many cycles. They are cosmological cycles that are converging, astronomical cycles, geological cycles, geophysical cycles, economic cycles, social cycles, political cycles, and interestingly, conflict and war cycles. When I spoke at the UN, they said, what do you mean war cycles? Don't wars just happen? And the answer is they can, but there are 17.7 year cycles for war. There are 56-year cycles of war. And you can plot them like clockwork, on a chart going back hundreds and hundreds of years. And the point is that we're living a convergence. The only time I've ever seen this happen, I'm in my 70s now, so it's the only time I've seen it in my lifetime, of course. But going back in history, I don't see any time in the last 5,000 years of recorded human history, where all of these cycles have converged the way that they are right now. And that's what makes our time so different. So they're converging. And Guy, when those cycles converge, they change the world. We're conditioned to cling to things that we have known and become accustomed to in the past. And when those things, we do this with relationships, we do this with jobs and careers. We always tend to stay longer. Typically, when they're not working, we say, well, maybe it's going to get better. Or what people say to me is, I can't wait until things get back to normal. I've had people say that to me. We can't go back to normal because normal implies that we go back to the world that used to be, and that world is gone. We have no world to go back to. I don't know everything that lies ahead of us. I'm not a prophet. But what I do know is this: if we lose our humanness, the game is over. Because if we give our humanness away to the technology, to the speed and the efficiency of AI and a computer chip, we have lost the mechanism that allows us to transcend the change. Because the machines cannot morph and adapt the way that we can. The machines are locked in to a way of being. So when the world changes again, those machines are locked into a way of being. They can't morph. They can't adapt to that way of being. So for me right now, the focus in my lifetime, I'm advocating for our humanness. I believe we're worth preserving.
Yeah.
I don't condone everything that our species has done. We can be a very cruel, vengeful, hateful species, and we can also have the most beautiful dreams and be the most benevolent forms of life. And that's what makes us so rare and beautiful and powerful and precious. And we stand to lose that in a single generation. And we've got to take care of our kids. We're not hearing enough about this, but the young people are being targeted because all they know is computers and AI. And they have come to worship those computers and those AIs. And we need to help our young people understand the value of what it means to be human. And my words are probably not the words that a family should use. So family has to take these ideas and convert them into their family language. But the bottom line is to love, cherish, and respect the gift of the human body for what it is and what it allows us.
Totally.
And we stand to lose that in this generation.